Hey everyone, welcome to part 4 of our How to Play series. Today we're going to be covering source actions. This is a very important topic in order to understand for both new players and TCG veterans, as this is something that really sets Sourcebound apart from other TCGs and is a central part of the game. As such, I've prepared 3 examples for us today to go over to demonstrate each of the 3 source actions that you can choose from on your turn. First, we're going to be covering how to play a source, then we'll be covering how to break a source, and then last but not least, covering when to transmute a source. As we go through these, we're also going to be discussing a little bit of tactics and things to think about when you're trying to decide which action to perform on your turn. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, starting off with how to play a source. Playing a source is the most simple of the 3 source actions and also the most common one that you'll perform throughout the course of the game in order to build up the resources necessary in order to play powerful summons and spells from your hand. To play a source, you simply take a card from your hand, place it in front of you, making sure that you've rotated it 180 degrees so the source line is at the top of the card. This source is now immediately ready to start producing resources as indicated on that source line. Couple tips when deciding which card to play as a source. You need to weigh a couple options. First of all, you need to determine which cards you want to be using right away. You also want to be looking at the matchup for your opponent, what things make sense to play or what things aren't going to be as effective, and then also looking down the road as to what cards you want to play later on. Couple examples of that would be this live wire wall gear. If your opponent has got some early aggression, they're dealing a lot of damage to you early on, this would be a good card to play out because it can really shut down their options there. But if they're not really attacking you early on, it doesn't really do you much good, and so it's a great candidate to be used as a source. One other example would be this Rust Horde Dragon here. Say you draw this card in your opening hand. Although it's one of your best cards, it is an expensive card, and as such, you won't be able to play it for a while. So it might make sense to play it as a source for a little bit, have it help build up resource, and then when the time is right, you break that source and bring it into play, which we'll go over in just a moment. The downside to doing this, however, is you have shown your opponent that you have the Rust Horde Dragon, and so they can start preparing for it. So when playing a source, again, you take a card from your hand, place it in front of you, make sure you rotate it 180 degrees, and it is immediately ready for use. Alright, next up we have breaking a source. Breaking a source allows you to take one of your source cards that is in play in front of you and play it out onto the field as if it were played from your hand. This is great when you have a source that you played earlier on in the game. For example, this Without a Trace. At the beginning of the game, we didn't really have a good target for it, so we played it as a source. Now, as the game has progressed, there's a big threat out there that we now want to get rid of with this card. So now that we have a good target for it, it seems like a good time to break this source. In order to break a source, you still pay the casting cost as normal. In this case, it would be 2 and a purple or 3 resources. And the source that you are breaking cannot pay for itself. So we will go ahead and pay our 3 resource. Additionally, the source that is being broken has to be in a refreshed position, meaning you can't use it for a resource that turn. When it is broken, you just rotate it back to the upright position, and then you can play it as normal. This card counts as being played from your hand. Breaking sources is a great way that you can adapt to threats and adapt to changes in the game as it progresses. It's also very useful for later on in the game as your hand size starts to dwindle. If you don't have a card that's good for that situation, you do have sort of like a secondary hand in front of you with your source line. One thing to keep in mind though, however, is when breaking a source, you do have fewer resources for the subsequent turn, so make sure you're not breaking sources too recklessly. And finally, we have transmuting a source. Transmuting a source is where you take a card that is in play and you will turn it into a source. In order to transmute a source, you have to pay one of any resource. It can be a colored resource, it can be colorless. In this example, let's use this colorless one here, and we're going to be transmuting the Elvish Martyr. There can be lots of reasons why you would transmute something. Either its effectiveness is gone, your opponent has a counter to something, you have a card that's actively hurting you. In this example here, we're choosing the Elvish Martyr because maybe she doesn't have a target to destroy an opposing relic. Maybe your opponent doesn't play any relics, and so she doesn't really have much use out in the battlefield for us. And so rather than just waste her, we're going to transmute her instead. So we've paid our 1, we move her down to our source line, and then we rotate her 180 degrees as if we had just played her as a source. This is also a great way if you're playing a multicolor deck, and say you have a card out here of a specific color that you really need more resource of, you can transmute it to get that needed resource. Another times when transmute sometimes makes sense is if your hand is full of really good cards that you don't want to play as a source, but you don't want to be falling behind on how much resource you have. You can transmute instead, be able to play a card, and you haven't fallen behind your opponent. Alright, and there you have it. Those are the 3 source actions in Sourcebound. You have playing a card from your hand as a source, breaking a source, paying its resource cost in order to put it into play, or paying 1 to transmute a card that's in play into a source. Remember, on each of your turns, you can only choose one of these 3 actions to perform, so choose wisely depending on what the situation is and what's going to be best for your overall game plan. Hope this helps you understand the source system, and looking forward to seeing some of the cool strategies and tactics that you're able to discover along the way. Thanks for watching.